Hello and welcome to Get Ready for the Answer. This is the place where you'll get all your answers to any recording, mixing, and music business questions that you might have. I am Bobby Owsinski. I'm a producer, a mixer, an author, podcaster, blogger, and a lot of other things as well. You may know me from some of my books. I've written 24 books on the music business, on audio, music production. The ones on the bottom are the most recent. Matter of fact, I've had seven number one bestsellers on Amazon in my books. And this one is the one that's been around since 1999. It's used in colleges all over the world, Mixing Engineer's Handbook. You might know me from my podcast. We've been doing it for 10 years, and it says 520 episodes. It's actually more like 540 now. You might know me from my blogs, my music production blog and my Music 3.0 blog, which is a music industry blog, or my courses. I have a number of online courses. Maybe you're a part of, maybe you will be someday. Usually when I do this, it's fairly random, or random questions that I've collected, people have sent in. In this case, it's pretty specific in that these questions come from here, the Awesome Mix workshop that we held back in December, and there are over 200 questions sent in. I didn't get to them all, so now we're going to do it here. And I'm going to split this into different categories because there are so many. In this case, we're going to be talking about mixing, balance, and panning questions, specifically about those. And this is part one. There's actually two parts to this one. But let's get started. There's some really good questions. Emmanuel asks, how can I make my drums wider? Well, let me ask you a question, Emmanuel. Why do you want to do that? If you make it too wide, they become distracting. So, for instance, if you have a hi-hat way out in the right, people tend to focus on that and not focus on the most important stuff, which is in the middle. This is what's known as the exit sign effect. And this was discovered way, way back in the early 60s when movies actually started to mix in stereo. And they found if they panned too far to the left, let's say, people's attention would go over here and look at the exit sign next to the screen and take the attention away from the most important things in the center. So that's what you want to do. You want to make them wide, and you're doing that with panning, maybe effects, but mostly panning. But if you make them too wide, you run that problem of taking the attention away from where it's most needed. Here's one from Colin. Do you see a time when AI will come into mixing? Yes, like right now. There's many, many really good AI plugins that you could use right now, and they work terrifically well for EQ, for setting up reverb, for compression, for limiting. Very good for noise reduction, for track separation. There's some great plugins that you can use. And many times they're just a starting place, but they're a good starting place. If you expect them to do all the work, maybe you won't get the results you quite want. But if you, again, think of it, this is a good starting place, it'll really get you going in the right direction. So yes, they're here right now. Sonable has some good ones. Focusrite has some good ones. Of course, Isotope has been doing this for a long time. There's a lot of good ones out there. Here's from Eric. Why do distributors say you have to master at minus 14 LUFS when other songs that compare aren't at minus 14 LUFS, or even the true peak is at 0.2 dB? Should I avoid the minus 14 LUFS rule? Well, distributors don't say you have to do that, and nobody does. That's, mastering engineers and big-time mixers, they don't care about LUFS, and you shouldn't either, because no matter what level that you send to a distributor, they re-encode it. So it becomes minus 14 LUFS. So you can send it at minus 10, minus 20, it doesn't matter. They're going to re-encode it anyway. The only time you should care about LUFS is if you're mixing for television. That's where it's most important. And you probably won't be, because that's a specialized mixer that's doing that. Television programs and also for commercials. It's very, very strict that they have to stay within guidelines. But usually it's only the final mixer that does that. So you're probably sending stuff in, that will go to an editor and then go to the mixer. So no, don't worry about LUFS. It's not important to you right now. And if you try to follow this, you try to get X amount of LUFS, you're going to chase your tail, spend a lot of time, and it won't matter in the long run. From Quigley, what type of meters are best to use in Pro Tools? Well, in any digital audio workstation, it's still best to use peak meters. And usually these are the default settings in digital audio workstation. And the reason why, if you go way, way back to the analog days, mixers wanted peak meters, but they just weren't available. And when they became available, they were so expensive that you couldn't put enough of them in a console anyway. So this is what mixers always desired, see the peak level. And this is actually something that you should be using now. So peak meters are the best. If you take notice in Pro Tools, I think there's like 9 different types of meters, and they're all very specialized for the most part. So unless you have a reason to use one of these specialty meters, best to just stay with peak. No name on this one. Too bad. What would you recommend for somebody who has age-related hearing loss and seems to always make their hi-hats and shakers too loud? Well, the first thing I would do is send a mix to a really good mastering engineer. This is super important. The reason why is the mastering engineer is going to let you know where the problems are. And that way you could use that to your advantage later. So mastering engineer will say, you know what, you're pushing 5K, 8K real hard. And that's why the hats and shakers are so loud, because you're EQing them when you don't need to, or maybe you're just adding too much. But when you hear from a mastering engineer saying, this is the problem, then you're able to kind of rein yourself in later when it comes to mixes. So I would do that. I'd spend the money to take it to a real mastering engineer and find out where the problems are for real, not guess at it. Here's from Andrew. Your thoughts on mixing with white noise? Well, we don't mix with white noise. We mix with pink noise. And there are several methods to do this, and they both work. And what we're basically doing is we're playing pink noise, and we're bringing the level of each fader up until we just about can barely hear it, and then we pull it back until we can't. And it, surprisingly enough, gets us a really balanced mix. It's not perfect. It's only a place to start, but it's usually really, really good. So it's pink noise that we're using. The other way is you have your mix that's all set up, and then you add pink noise and you see what sticks out. And anything that's sticking out, it's telling you it's too loud. So both of these methods are pretty good, not for a final mix, but for check, either to start or for a check later on. But this is not white noise, it's pink noise that we're using. From Gerald, I usually start mixing with the kick. What's the best ratio when it comes to drum bus, other instruments, background bus, and lead bus? Well, it depends on the song, and it depends on the genre more than anything. Your final balances always have to do with the song, because every song is different. The arrangement is different. The sounds are different. So there are places that we can start from, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's where it's going to end up. So for instance, there's a chart that I show in some of my workshops. So next time I give a workshop, see if you can come by and you'll see it. But basically what happens is you set your peak meter on your master bus, you solo up the kick, and just about the time it tickles -5, then it's good. And you do the same thing with the snare. The bass might be more around -10, and the vocal might be there as well. Might be higher, might be at -5, depending on the genre of music, because vocals are different at different levels for different genres of music. But that pretty much tells us where these things should start. I'm not saying it should finish that way, but it's a good place to start. So next time we do a workshop, watch for that particular, that's a handout actually that you get, or it's a screen share, I think. From Ian, what dBA level do you recommend mixing in a DAW? I'm reading a lot of conflicting info on this. Now, I'm not sure that I understand your question. Well, no, let's put it another way. dBA level is sound pressure level. This is the level coming out of the speakers that you're listening to. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about or not. If that's the case, there are certain levels that have always been used in different industries. For instance, 82 dB is usually a good place for, and this is not dBA, but dBc, so it's a different weighted scale. And this is what television uses, or actually 78 is what television uses. 82 to 85 is what movies use, and they never change the level. It's always the same. Mastering engineers are pretty much the same as well. They don't necessarily go for a certain level. They go for what they think is comfortable, but they never change levels up and down. And I would suggest you do the same thing with mixing. I suggest the 3-level method, one that's pretty high, that's moving some air, and then you can hear what's going on with the low end, and then a level that you do 95% of your mixing at that's comfortable, and then finally at the end you turn it down to whisper level, and that way things kind of jump out if they're not at the right level, or if you're not hearing them, you go, oh wait, I got to change that, I got to move it up a little. So that's a good way to do things. But just sitting there with an SPL meter, that's actually not what you want to do. And if you're talking about levels, meter levels, that's a completely different story and a completely different explanation. Here's one from Luke. My DAW has a width button on each channel. Should drums, bass, and vocals be turned back towards the mid-width level? You shouldn't be using width. Width is only for use with stereo tracks. If all your tracks are stereo, even then, it's still not all that effective. Usually, if you right-click on the pan pot, it'll change from width to pan, and that's what you want. It might be balance, might say balance, and that's really what you want. Either a balance controller or a straight-up pan pot, because that way you can control things a lot better. If it's just width, all it is just, and that doesn't help you because you can't really pinpoint where in the panoramic spectrum you want things to appear at. So try that. Right click on the pan pot and see what happens. On the width button and see what happens. From Imam, how does professional mixing make one track more upfront, but loudness seems like in a similar level, and also be able to keep the frequency details on most of the tracks? Yeah, that's the skill of a mixer, isn't it? Mixers spend a lot of time trying to figure both of those things out. For the most part, it's the correct use of compression, but it's not all that. It's automation, it's a clip gain. A combination of those things will keep the level pretty much the same. It's okay if it changes a little bit, but you don't want it to change too much. And it's the same thing with loudness. You want to keep the loudness, if there's too much variation, if it's too dynamic, that sounds great for certain types of music and not so much for others. But yes, that's the skill that we all try to learn, how to do that. And the frequency details. You're talking about the frequency details. What really that means is how do I make sure I can hear everything in the mix and it still sounds good? And yes, that's a skill. That's something I teach in my courses, by the way. Okay, from Jeff. Why is the vocal the third track when often it serves as a guide track when recording? Okay, this is a recording question. It's kind of snuck in here rather than a balance question. I get a better vocal feel when all the instruments are complete. Ending up with the last track recorded to help me understand. Okay, so yes, you misunderstand this. In this last workshop that I did, I recommended that when you start a mix, in order to make sure that you always maintain a good vocal balance, get the vocals into the mix as soon as possible. And I recommend putting them in third. In other words, the drums, the bass, and then the vocals, and then you build the rest of the mix around it. When you do that, you're pretty much always going to have a pretty good vocal level. If you wait until the end, you build up your whole track and you put the vocals in at the end, that's when you have problems because you can't really find the right level. It's either too loud or too soft. So that's why I suggest you do that. But that's for mixing, not for recording. Recording, you can do any order that works for you. And all types of orders have been used in the past, and whatever works, works. But as far as mixing, it's, different story. So you're talking about recording where I was talking about mixing. Okay, from Leonard. EDM vocals in Big Beat, Prodigy, Chemical Brothers, Fatboy Slim are buried a little in the mix like rock. Yeah, and the reason why is Big Beat. You want to emphasize the beat. In rock, you want to emphasize the band, so the vocals are usually a little buried in the mix, and you have to listen hard for the lyrics sometimes. And it's the same thing in some other genres where you want to emphasize the band or the beat, so the vocals are a little bit behind, a little bit down from the beat, from whatever the loop is that's giving you the beat, or kick and claps, things like that. And speaking of which, rappers always tell me they want their voice inside the beat. Any experience with that, how to produce that desired outcome? Yeah, again, what that means is the vocals are not too loud. The vocal, you can hear the beat, you can hear the kick, you can hear the claps or snare, whatever it is that you're using. Still hear the rap, still hear the vocal, but the vocal isn't so loud that it overcomes whatever is providing the beat. That's what they're talking about. So it's just finding that right level that you can still hear the vocal, it sounds really good, but it doesn't overpower the beat. That's what it's talking about. Okay, from Jonah. I'm currently working on an EDM track, so inherently it's pretty wide. I'm having a hard time getting my levels right in the sense that they won't transfer well to mono. Have any recommendations? Most clubs play in mono due to the contingencies of some that come about playing in stereo. Yeah, this is one of the problems, especially if you pan things hard left, hard right. And then in a situation like a club, you might have a mix element that's over in the right side, and only the people in that part of the club can hear it, and the other people can't. So that's why they do everything in mono. What you have to do is listen in mono a lot, and listen right from the start. You don't have to mix in mono, but you have to listen to it in mono to make sure it all works. If you're having a hard time, it sounds like it's a classic case of phase cancellation, meaning that you may be using an effect somewhere that's, when you get to mono, it cancels out. This is normally a modulator of some type. That sounds great in stereo, and you put it to mono, and all of a sudden, either it drops out completely or the level drops. And I suspect that's what's happening. So what I would do is, just as an experiment, go back and take the effects off and listen to mono and see what happens. And that will tell you pretty much what the problem is, that therein lies the problem. And what you can do then is bring them back one by one and see if, maybe there's an effect that you're using on everything and it's canceling it all out. So, yeah, it sounds like a classic case of phase cancellation. So there we are for part one. Part two is coming soon. Again, just on balance and panning. And there's also ones coming up on EQ, on compression, on production, which is a really good one, on gear, and finally on music business itself. So with that, I hope to see you the next time we do this. I hope you enjoyed this one. And if one of your questions was in here, I hope I answered it to your satisfaction. If not, drop me a line and I'll see what I can do. Let me leave you with this. You might want to take my free mixing crash course. You'll learn 3 techniques that will actually show you some of the things that we talked about. Balance, EQ, and compression. And you're going to hear the difference right away. So just go to mixingcrashcourse.com. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.